All right, hello everyone, and welcome to today's session. This is session one in a two-part series, the importance of front-end planning and leveraging industry best practices. My name is Jeremy Rasmussen. I'm PTAG Chief Technology Officer, and I'll be today's moderator for the session. I'd like to hand it over to Feroz to introduce himself. Feroz?
Thank you, Jeremy. Feroz Ashraf, Global Executive Advisor for all capital projects at PTAG. Just as a quick background, I have about 30 plus years of EPCM experience on over 300 projects, from small projects to large projects over 5 billion across Canada and globally. I also had an opportunity not only to work for the contractors, but I also worked for owner's company. I had an opportunity to be a chief project officer, chief operating officer, and a CEO of a company in 6 different locations. So very happy to be part of the seminar today, or webinar today, and I will be delivering the second half of this webinar today. Michael, you would be initiating the webinar. Over to Michael.
Thanks, Feroz. My name is Michael Dubreuil. I am the Managing Director here at PTAG, and I've been a project manager for as long as I can remember. That's probably not saying much today, but for most of my career, I've been a project manager. I've managed and developed projects in every industry except healthcare, from 3-letter agencies and all around the world to industrial, retail, finance. And so today I work with industry to help them improve how they plan and improve projects. And in particular, I work with the Construction Industry Institute that we'll talk a little later. And I'm an advisor to organizations that are looking to use collaborative contracting and delivery strategies. We're going to give you a brief commercial on PTAG, and then we're going to spend the balance of the session talking to you about the importance of front-end planning and how best practices can improve your front-end planning capabilities. But first, we're going to talk about why we front-end plan and what happens if we don't. So PTAG, we're a program project management advisory firm for industrial projects in the mining, minerals, oil and gas, power, distribution and transmission, and what we call heavy infrastructure. We help owners plan and deliver projects all around the world. And our mission is to increase the predictability and success rates on the projects we're involved in by incorporating collaborative and risk-sharing strategies and using proven best practices and lean management techniques, along with state-of-the-art, ever-evolving tools to help organize this. So that's who we are in a nutshell. So failure as an industry, I'm going to talk about why projects go off track and a quick discussion on root causes. We could spend an hour just on this one topic, but I get a couple of minutes to kind of set the stage for why front-end processing or front-end planning is so critical, and why using best practices to support your front-end planning efforts can go a long way. So if you take a look at multiple studies out in industry, and here's an example of 4 of them, the statistics are staggering in terms of we as an industry and our success rates. I mean, it's we do have successes, and we should celebrate and learn those successes, but in general, as you can see from these stats, it's a challenge. You know, according to Brendan Bechtel at an annual conference, CIA annual conference, 98% of projects over $1 billion exhibit significant cost overruns. Merrow talks about 65% of projects failing to meet their business objectives. Ernst & Young did a study that shows that 73% of projects of mega projects experience schedule overruns. And probably the most telling, as you compare one industry to another industry, is the comparison of the construction industry, industrial construction industry, to manufacturing. 57% of resources are wasted in construction as compared to 26% of applied resources in manufacturing, almost double. So that's our challenge. And so if you ask the question why, there's lots of answers. And today I'm going to talk to you about a couple of studies that we like to refer to. Poor communications is a big reason. Unrealistic schedules, lack of stakeholder buy-in, unrealistic budgets, insufficient or no risk planning. According to McKinsey, another slice at it, again back to poor organization and decision-making, contractual misunderstandings, poor short-term planning, limited talent management for those involved, or limited experience. So underlying root causes can be summed up in many ways. For purposes of today, we think that lack of front-end planning is a primary challenge for a lot of the projects that we get pulled into to help collect up the horses after they're out of the barn door. Lack of stakeholder engagement. I can't tell you how many times that's been a challenge. And I think Feroz is going to talk about one particular example a little later on. No stage gate processes for checking as you go from stage to stage, or stage gate processes that are too rigid, which in the end create a barrier and people go through the motions but don't take it seriously. And then critical scope changes during execution. The time for setting your scope is what we're going to spend today is front-end planning, but too often we see critical scope changes during execution. And if slightly different view of the world, but one that's pretty telling is to take a look at productivity. Productivity drives a lot of success or not success. But this study looked at productivity, and it found that 2/3 of the issues to do with productivity have to deal with management and organizational factors. That's probably most of us on this call, that we sit in that 2/3 bucket. Think about that. We have the greatest control over projects being successful by a factor of 2/3 if we choose to change the way we do, if we plan and execute projects. So we're going to spend the balance of today talking about front-end planning and leveraging best practices for improved front-end planning. The goal is to ensure we're performing the right project, scoping the right things, setting the stage for successful execution, doing it the right way, and documenting the scope of work into an organized basis of design. With that, front-end planning is that process we should all go through to develop the necessary requirements to be able to estimate, schedule, plan scope, plan execution, so that we can make an informed decision as to whether it makes sense to move forward and commit resources to execute a project. If you look at front-end planning in terms of the various phases of a project, front-end planning is typically shown as the first 3 phases. The concept phase, where we generate the various options, develop a feasibility report. We go into feasibility. We take a look at the different alternatives and generate a concept phase report. And then, assuming we get a green light, we move forward into detailed scope. Simple, straightforward. But if we don't get it right, lots of things that none of us are looking forward to happen. One of them is change. If you don't get your front-end planning right, projects that don't get front-end planning right tend to have a lot of change. This chart here shows that the cost of change, the ability to change from one approach to another approach during concept and feasibility, or even during the detailed scoping design is much easier to do and costs significantly less than if we're making those changes during the tail end of detailed design, construction, or heaven forbid, once we turn it over to operations. So the benefits of using best practices in front-end planning to get those 3 initial phases right. There's many studies that have been done on this, and it shows that every dollar spent on front-end planning saves $25 in execution and commissioning. Using constructability as a best practice, bringing constructors and OEMs into the design phase and into the scope development phase early can save up to 6% in terms of costs and up to 7.5% in terms of schedule. And then another best practice, contracting and partnering. If we get that right and it's fit for purpose as we come out of the front-end planning process, owners can save up to 9% or see up to 9% in cost improvements. And these are various studies that have come out of CII, the Construction Industry Institute. And the Construction Industry Institute is a partnership between industry and academia, organized out of the University of Austin, Texas. And it's a combination of academics, owners, constructors, engineers, and industry consultants. It's been around for 35 years. And their mission is to do research and validate that research into areas to improve the planning and execution of industrial projects. Their view of the world is that there's 7 phases that a project goes through, and in between each of these phases, there's various stage gates. And so what I've attempted to do with this diagram is show you a series of best practices that come out of industry and or out of the Construction Industry Institute. And when those best practices make sense to apply them at various phases. Some of these phases, such as risk management, span the bulk of all the phases of your project, while others are done at a specific point in time. And so today I'm going to talk to you about 4 different best practices in a little more detail. Specifically, those what we think are key best practices to support the front-end planning process. So team building builds and develops the shared goals, interdependence, trust, commitment, and accountability amongst team members. Projects are executed by people, and we all know that sports teams that have a series of superstars and the highest payroll don't always win the cup. It's those sports teams, just like project teams, that have learned to work together, depend on each other, count on each other, that seem to execute well. And it's no different in project. Various elements in team building. And one of the things we always get feedback on is team building and alignment appear to be variations of the same concept, but as it says here, you know, they're really 3 distinct concepts, but different complementary functions. So alignment addresses the concern where all team members are working together in the same correct goal. Think of people in a boat rowing together. If everybody rows together, the boat goes forward. If everybody rows in different directions, the boat goes in circles. Teamwork involves team members effectively working together, supporting each other, and knowing when and how to utilize the strengths that each bring to the team. And team building is that process we use to develop and enhance teamwork. All 3 concepts work together. And what this chart on the right shows is that as you go through team building assessment that as team building increases, your effectiveness of team building increases, cost goes down. Cost of engineering goes down, schedule goes down, procurement, same thing in the middle bars there. And, you know, the more dramatic than all of it, your startup costs. If you get team building right, your startup costs for your assets can go down significantly as compared to projects that don't engage in team building as part of their front-end planning processes. Alignment is a second best practice, and that's where we get to set the objectives that all participants and all stakeholders agree to and commit to in the planning, execution, commissioning, and turnover of a project. Setting those objectives and gaining commitment is critical to ensuring that your project team is aligned. Projects are successful on not just owners that are committed, but owners and all of the suppliers. As we can see in the last point there, few owners today have the ability to plan and carry out all the aspects of a project. This graph shows the 3 dimensions of alignment. It starts on the far right there with a top-down approach. Internally within an organization, so you know you've got senior executive commitment down through the organization to functional specialists. You've got cross-organizational alignment for the business, project management, operation groups, and other stakeholders. And then you've got the third dimension, the longitudinal, that looks at alignment through the various phases of a project. So the third best practice we're going to talk about and build on as we go through the presentation here today is the project risk assessment, looking at both opportunities and threats to the project. You know, risk assessment is one of those best practices that carries on from the front-end planning parts of your project all the way through to into operations. And risk assessment is different depending on who you are: investor, contractor, owner, employee, shareholder. So risk and opportunity looks different depending on where you're coming from. Assessing the risk of a project starts right from initiation and runs right through into operations. You know, having a formalized risk management plan and keeping it as simple as possible helps. Risk management, if it's complex and full of interesting mathematical models, is great for those that like that type of stuff, but for those that have to digest it and react to it, not necessarily a useful tool. One of the things with respect to risk is ensuring that if you get it right, you're taking advantage of the opportunities that are part of the risk analysis process as much as the threats that come along. One of the key criteria in assessing risk is to recognize that certain projects are more prone to risk than others. It may be location, it may be the type of project, it may be the social environment or the political environment that your project is getting launched into. Risk comes from many different points of view. And if not properly assessed and managed, it can end up costing you money. You know, costing your project money because you missed a great opportunity to reduce cost or improve capacity, or you missed an opportunity, or you missed a threat and a chance to avoid the threat or mitigate the threat. And then, assuming you've got your front-end planning done well, and you've gone through the 3 stages, you've applied best practices, kind of a fourth best practice we're going to talk about today is that of assessing your front-end planning. How good is it? How mature is it? How complete is your front-end planning? we're going to talk today about a tool that the industry is more and more widely adopting, and that's something known as the PDRI, or the Project Definition Rating Index. Today, there are 9 separate researched, validated tools that are in the PDRI family that are specific to industry type and specific to project size and scale. High-level elements of a PDRI is it's a facilitated workshop, typically 2 to 4 hours in session, with a series of questions. Depending on the type of PDRI, you're running anywhere from 50 to the latest version. For mining is somewhere in the neighborhood of 170 different questions, organized into various baskets that address the basis of project decision, basis of design, your execution approach, the maturity of your project team. All depends on which PDRI tool you pick. The output of the front-end planning assessment using the PDRI is a list of action items to improve on those things where you didn't score well. Maybe you missed permitting, maybe you missed elements in your construction planning, or maybe you missed having a good communications plan with stakeholders. A facilitated PDRI is going to tease those things out, and it's going to tease those things out at the right stage in the process. If you look at the top chart on the right-hand side, it talks about, you'll see in the green arrows there, 1, 2, 2I, and 3. These are the stages between phases primarily where you would run a PDRI. And as you move through the phases, the questions that you ask as you're reviewing the front-end planning assessment are more and more detailed. And the idea is to score. The lower the score with PDRIs, the better. If you're scoring above the red line, you're not doing enough in your planning process. And if you're scoring substantially below the green line, you're probably doing too much at that phase in the project. The idea is a lower score is better, but there's that sweet spot between the green and the red lines. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to my colleague, Feroz Ashraf here.
So what I'm going to do is I'm going to walk you through some of the nuts and bolts of the front-end planning process. I'm going to go through what is the stage gate process is all about. And as you can see from here that we all start the project with a business case or a concept stage. And the real opportunity over there is, what is the investment opportunity that we are looking at? What's the potential business opportunity, and what we need to do, and how we can optimize our business strategy and outcome. That's the main focus of the initial stage, is to really establish the business case. And as you move from the concept to the feasibility stage, the emphasis of the project or the emphasis of the stage gate process changes, where you are no longer worried about the business case, you have established it, but you're looking at options. You're looking which of the best represents the option for my maximum internal rate of return and net present value for the project. Most people do it at pre-feasibility level, then they go it at feasibility study level, and some even go a little bit further to what is called bankable feasibility study level. Irrespective of your definitions, the important part is that in the feasibility stage, you have all the opportunities to look at all the options, filter them down, analyze them, select the best technical alternatives, select the best least risk alternative. And then once you go to the detailed stage of the project, that's when you're really looking at optimizing your project configuration. Most of the time we find when we go and look at the projects, why projects don't succeed or have not succeeded or running into difficulty, we find that the team has really skipped from the concept to the detailed stage. They have missed out on what they call option analysis or trade study. Look, Mike said it, for every dollar you spent in the front-end planning process, you save $25. The later you do it or you skip the process, you're going to increase higher cost of doing it, and you are not doing it in proper sequence. Obviously, the whole idea of step 3 is to define the scope completely as much as you can, get the approval for funding. That's when you know the scope, you know the schedule, you know the performance criteria, and then you can comfortably go to the detailed design and carry out your project and detail out how you're going to execute the project. I've seen projects where even in detailed design, they are looking at options which should have been filtered out earlier. But I am not suggesting that if there is a safety issue or there's a maintenance issue or something that has come up that has been a miss out item, that you don't address it. All I'm saying is make a disciplined approach to make sure that you carry all the front-end activities ahead of time. And that's why I'm saying a disciplined approach, a fit-for-purpose approach is critical. Stakeholder engagement is key over there. And we have found in many cases that the people who develop the front-end planning process hand it over to the project team at this stage. The assessment between the people who have developed the front-end plan and versus the people who have inherited the assessment plan, sometimes we find that the assessment of the quality of assessment is big. In other words, the work has been done, but you also need to look at the quality of work. Is the plot plan correct? Just because the plot plan exists doesn't mean it's an optimized plot plan. Just because the specification exists, has it been optimized or not? And if you don't have members in your team who can analyze those difficult areas or technical areas in a quick way, and that's what I mean, that for every stage, you need to do a review. You need to get subject matter experts. If you don't have it, get a few people who know that. They can look at the independent eye. They call it cold eyes, independent peer review, whatever you call it, subject matter experts, to improve the quality of your front-end planning process. It's as simple as that. If you don't put the effort up front, and if you fail to set up your project execution plan or front-end plan, you will set up to fail. I have in my career done about 300 projects. Not all projects have been successful. Most projects have been successful, and the projects which have not been successful, when I look back, we accelerated the project to meet this schedule, all of the above, or we did not or failed to do a proper front-end planning process. I also want to sort of emphasize that front-end planning does not necessarily just mean technical deliverables. People worry too much about technical deliverables. In fact, Mike pointed out also that 9% of the project factors are due to technical issues. Most of the time, it is really execution issues, risk analysis, soft factors, other factors, stakeholder engagements. So here, make sure you have your work breakdown structure correctly sorted out, organizational breakdown structure correctly sorted out. What does the work breakdown structure mean? How you are going to divide the project. Make sure that all the team members understand the work breakdown structure. And if you don't do the work breakdown structure and organization work breakdown structure, you won't be able to establish what is called the contract breakdown structure. It doesn't matter how you've done the estimate. In the end, you have to convert the estimate into how you're going to execute the projects in the executable contract packages. So you need to convert your estimate into contract breakdown structure. And once you have done that and you have linked it, then you would be able to complete your project setup and budgeting process. Then you would be able to go and do the contract formation. Am I going to do EPC? Am I going to do EPCM? Am I going to do I2PD? Am I going to do PMO approach? I'm going to do lump sum, fixed price, unit rate, whatever. But unless you have done the basic framework and the risk analysis, you will not be able to do a proper contract formation and a contract award strategy. One of the fundamentals is that most people find that most companies do indeed carry out the front-end process quite well. They do define the contracts and the technical deliverables very well, but they end up choosing a wrong construction or contracting strategy. In one particular case, a particular owner had a very tight spot, absolutely congested brownfield. In fact, I would classify as a black field environment. It was very, very tight and congested space. And they decided that because of the risk that they had on this tight space and a limited space, that they wanted to carry out the project. They converted and carry out most of the project on a fixed price basis. But little did it realize that by giving out the fixed price or EPC basis, the owner loses the steering wheel on the operational part of it. It's the operational element that needs to be worked on, especially on a shutdown processes and projects. So make sure that you don't have a round peg in a square hole. Make sure you correct the right construction strategy. Trending and forecasting becomes relatively easy once you have done all of that above. So setting the system up to give you right information is important, because if you don't know where you are, you don't know where you're going. And most of the people say, oh, I know where I'm going. And I'm saying, you know exactly where you are today? What is the % progress that you have? Is there an alignment in your team that you actually are at 45%? If you have spent 45%, does not mean that you have achieved 45% progress. You may have achieved 50% progress. You may be ahead, or you may be behind. So I would strongly encourage you to look at many other elements of it. And what you need to do is to look at the project setup and make sure your project management and project handbooks are correct. Here is a simple example of whether you're a small company, large company, mid-sized company, whatever is the size of the company, you have your own internal processes, procedures, whether they are in 1 volume, 2 volumes, 30 volumes, 15 volumes. I've seen 30 volumes in some cases. There is a volume to manage the other, how to read the other 29 volumes. And what we find is that these days, in the fast environment in which the project team is working and the rotation in which the team works, the team members do not have the patience or knowledge to go through all of it. We found at PTAG, we have developed a project management and controls handbook. It's a 50, 60-page handbook, which actually links to all these process. So it's a simple guide. People can go into it, look into it. Here's a simple example of how each of these key areas, there is 2 or 3 pages to it rather than a volume by itself. In some cases, in some industry, there is a volume for every section. Like project setup, there's a volume for that. It's 100, 200 pages volume for that. For cost estimating, there's a whole Bible on it. And what we are saying is, all the team needs is a quick guide and a quick roadmap and a quick link to how they can access the information. It's better for the team to get 10% of the information on time than to have lots of information later. So this is a very good tool we find, and I will show you some examples of it. I am going to show you, for example, this is the chapter of the book. And if you want to look at 3-week low-head schedule, what it looks like, you can click on it. It's a standard way. It gives you an idea of what you need to do. If you want to know where your progress is on the curve on the project, you can click on it and you can get the sense of what it means like. And the same way, if you want to know the cost, you can look at what your estimated completion is, what your estimate to complete, how much work needs to be done. It's in all the simple, I mean, there is a detailed table behind it, but this is just as an example. So in other words, it helps all the team members align to what needs to be done. With that, I'm going to move forward and talk a little bit about project delivery model. What is a project delivery model? In other words, a lot of team knows what to do, but what is going to be the list of deliverables and what is the project delivery model they need to choose? The answer is, most of the time, corporate procedures follow one set of guidelines for all the projects. In some cases, they divide between capital projects and sustaining projects, but most of the time, we don't see that the project team has been given a guidance on depending on the complexity of the project. Our view is, if it's a simple project, adapt a simple project execution plan. If it's a complex project, do a complex full detail execution plan. So here is the front page of our project complexity model that we developed at PTAG. And as you can see over here, we have identified the front page to be the list of priorities is the first one. What is the priority of your project? Is this a high priority must do legislative requirement, or is it a low priority, low impact project? If it's a high priority, high complex project, then it requires a lot of rigor. If it's a low priority, low impact project, then you may adopt a simple process. So once you have chosen your language selection, you go down and you basically look at what is step number one. I did talk to you about just select P1 to P5. Now I have put forward a simplistic definition, but in our model, we have a much more elaborate definition as to what P1, P2, P3, P4, and P5 are. So you select them, and then the next step is very simple. Go to the language text, whether it's English, French, or others, and you can choose your language of choice. We have identified 10x4 matrix, and depending on the 10x4 matrix, you select your rating, whether it's a low rating, high impact rating, and depending on the rating, the model will then calculate based on the industry experience and what we have found to be what is known as the aggregate complexity factor, whether it is C1, C2, C3, C4, C4 being most complex, C1 being least complex, and P1 being the highest priority. So once you have done the combination of priorities and complexity factor, the model would then say, show me the proposed or recommended project delivery model. And we have simplified this. And then you say, but what stage of the project you are in? Are you in the concept stage? Then it will give you a list of concept deliverables. If you're in the engineering stage, it will give you a full list of engineering deliverables. If you're in the construction stage, it will give you a full list of construction phase. In other words, depending on the complexity of the project, depending on the size of the project team will have a good recipe in front of them. There is, of course, there is judgment involved. There is review involved, but at least it provides a simple, nice deliverable list for the team. And in the end, there is a tab saying, show me the deliverable list for the selected PDM. And I showed to you about a high priority, high complexity results in full a delivery model. A simpler one will go into the simple thing. The model also gives you a guideline on what kind of team structure you should have. Again, these are very simplified definition in the chart I'm showing you, but there is a lot more detail behind it. What is your stage gate process should be, how frequently you should do it, what is the commercial structure you should have, what is the minimum reporting requirement you should have. It gives you a guideline for the team. And what it does is, in some companies which end up doing 50, 100, 200, 300 projects a year, it provides a very good roadmap for all the team. Even if you're doing 3 or 4 different multi-billion-dollar projects or several $100 million projects, this recipe gives you a very good roadmap. I'm just going to quickly show you what the deliverable list looks like. This is a classic, this is a PDM1, which is high complexity. And if you can see orange, the bar on the left corner, orange is mandatory requirement, yellows are recommended requirement, green is optional. You don't see any green here because for a high priority, high complex project, most of the items are to do and you need to do it. But if you were to sort of, it will tell you on the concept stage on column 2, what is your requirement, in feasibility study, what's your requirement, and so on and so forth. If you go back and you look at the simplistic model, the simplistic model then shows you the orange bars are few, the yellow bars are few, the green bars are many. Doesn't mean it is not required. It means it's optional. You need to read it, review it, and adapt it for your project. But it allows the team to make their project delivery simplistically. So what is the value of front-end planning processes? Mike talked about best practices. I talked to you about the rigor and the step-by-step toolkit on what needs to be done. And our assessment, and this is based on industry data, that if you were to really plan your project and do it well, and if you do it perfectly, you will end up with team building, alignment, constructability, front end, and handbook usage. You will end up saving over 15 to 20% in engineering cost, and you will end up spending, saving 15 to 20% in the construction cost. Fairly significant. And not only that, you actually also end up saving on schedule. Schedule, time is money. You finish the project early or you delay the project, it costs you money. And therefore you see significant savings also in the schedule and cost. In summary, you must, I'm just gonna quickly summarize it here in one line comments. must do the project setup, initiation, kickoff, and alignment. Mike talked about it, I emphasized it, and do a stage gate process. Don't forget the value of stage gate. It's not the tick box exercise that I've done this. It's the quality of the stage gate is far more important. 90% of the stage gate material done with 100% is one option, or 100% done at 90% level is another option. Make sure you complete all of it. Don't miss out on deliverables. Team structure, very important. Is it going to be a matrix structure? Is it going to be a flat structure? Is it going to be a core structure? Is it going to be a simple, and not just for the owner's team. It's the owner's team and the contractor. And most of the time we find that the owner's team is structured this way and the contractor team is structured this way, and they just don't mix and correlate with each other. They are two independent structures, but make sure you have an integrated structure. Governance policy procedures, we talked about it. Not suggesting you compromise on governance, but if you can simplify and develop a project procedure or a handbook that we talked about, it will simplify and save you 5-6% of the project cost. Prioritization is very important, P1, P2, P3, P4, and what stage is what items are important. Prioritize them, make sure if you prioritize them, assess the risk in a high, medium risk category as well. Make sure that you have a project information system. It's like, if you don't have a GPS in the car, I mean, can you imagine? I mean, the time you used to go and do police map, but now it's like PMIS system. It's like a GPS in your car. It tells you exactly where you're going and when you're going to reach your destination, and if you're going to reach your destination or you need to take a bypass. I think that is an important tool that you need to do. QA, QC, and stakeholder management is critical. Make sure all your stakeholder is important. In one case in Ring of Fire project, the project went up to 60% engineering and 20% construction, little to realize that the stakeholder did not accept the construction plan as it was submitted, and they had to move from an open pit mine to an underground mine. Can you imagine an open pit concept to an underground concept? It's a massive change, and had to redesign the entire project in order to meet the stakeholder requirement. Last but not least, site planning and logistics are becoming very important. Don't leave the operational input to the end. And last but not least, people make the plan. Planning is one thing, schedule is another one. Make sure you have both your planning and schedule always updated with resource loading and pole planning processes. With that, I like to hand it back, Jeremy, to you. And one last sentence in the end. It's not all about technical deliverables, folks. It's about managing the big picture from A to Z. And if you follow these 10-step processes, we can help you in any of these areas, and we could provide advice and guidance to you. You will have a higher probability of success on your project.
That's great. Thank you, Feroz, and thank you, Michael. You two just packed in a lot of information in a short period of time. We're now going to move over to the Q&A portion. And just while we're doing that, if you wanted to add Feroz or add Michael to your contacts, feel free to take a picture with your smartphone of the QR code and add them, or type in their cell phone number and email address there. So with that, a couple questions. A couple people have asked, will we be sharing the recording and the slide deck? Yes, we will. Everybody will receive an email after this session later on today and get a copy of the recorded video and the slide deck. A couple people have asked if we would provide a certificate of attendance. Yes, we can do that on request, and the details will be provided on how to request that at the end of the second session. Now, as far as questions, Feroz, this is one for you. Is it possible to purchase the PTAG, PM, and Project Control Handbook?
Oh, of course, it's possible to purchase PTAG handbook, but you know, there is not one version of the handbook. It's a fit for purpose handbook. It's not like a generic process. It's a make to do handbook. So while it is based on all the best practices and all the tools that we have learned over the years, we would like to sit down with whoever is interested in is to adapt the handbook to their requirement. And we want to make sure that if they're looking for size 7, we give them size 7 and not size 8. And we will provide them with the handbook or the guidance for the handbook that will best meet their corporate objectives and the project requirements.
Great. This question is from Bill, and he asks, since the project team's culture, communication, and cohesion is very important for the project's success, how can you help owners to overcome corporate bureaucracy, compartmentalization, and self-interest? Michael, could you answer that one?
What an interesting question. Isn't that the challenge that we face on projects in many organizations? I don't think there's a simple answer. Team building that I talked about up front helps with that as people get to know each other. Your contracting strategy helps. If you're into a collaborative and integrated contracting strategy, such as alliancing or industrial integrated project delivery, your contracting strategy forces all the various silos, not only from the owner organization, but also from your supplier organizations, to have to get on board and go through a series of exercises that help drive that. And then I guess the other thing I would say is through your PMO or your EPO or however your project organization is organized, ongoing training that looks at some of the research that's coming out of the Construction Industry Institute, as an example, talks about how you can bring supply chain in early into your business planning processes, the upfront concept or feasibility. So a bit of a long answer, no single approach, but hopefully I gave you a few good ideas.
Yeah, Mike, I just wanted to add to that was my observation also is that I'm not saying it's generic to all the organization, but in some organization, the senior management are non-project people, if I could say it that way. They come from business background, they come from finance background, they come from legal background, other background, and their understanding of what the complexity of the project is very different. And sometimes they end up imposing what is called wishful thinking on the project team. And that's where the alignment has to come in, where the project team has to really educate, if I were to say, or explain to their management what and how it is difficult to carry out the project and what the difficulty is in realizing certain project objectives. So that kind of communication also has happened, top down, bottom up, and sometimes it helps. Sorry about that. Yeah.
Great, thanks. This next question is from Ken, and he asks, PDRIs are fairly high level and not a forensic project audit. How do you mitigate optimism or defensive consultants from impacting the outcomes of a PDRI? Feroz?
Well, look, I think, Mike, even though you, first of all, you do PDRI at various stages of the project, you do 4 or 5 or 6 PDRI if I have to. For example, in the mining industry, they have come up with 170 questions, right? And the normal industrial PDRI is 70 questions. It is not the amount of questions is high level. It is really the depth behind each of these questions that you need to poke into and make sure that you get into. So that's the first level. Once you've identified the big areas or the top 10 areas of the PDRI that stands out, then you need to peel the onions, go into level 2, level 3, level 4, and then find what is the root cause of your problem. So you can actually granularize the PDRI into much more detailed level. It's a planning tool. It's not just an assessment or a scorecard or a thermometer that you're going to say, oh yeah, I scored 355 score. Yep, I made it well. You need to look at which areas are strong, which areas are weak. Are you doing it in proper sequence? So yes, you do that, and then you go back to your handbook and look at the handbook and say, what are the critical steps that you need to do in a proper sequence? You go and look at your corporate procedures, what sequence you need to do, and see what things you're doing well, what things you're not doing well, where you are struggling, and then you can peel the onion. And I'm finding it's a good starting point, but it's not the end point.
Yeah, thanks, Feroz. I would also add, having been involved in a number of PDRIs, that it's not about one person or one department's or one function's opinion. It's really about bringing the entire project team and having that consensus answer. So that typically helps mitigate one overly optimistic group or function that's contributing to the team.
Correct.
Next question.
And that's driven.
Go
Sorry,
ahead,
I was just going to say, and that's driven by the skill of your facilitator. Facilitators that do this often enough understand how to pull the information out to ensure that honest answers are moving forward. They understand how to manage the overly energetic individual, whether they're positive or negative, to allow all the other voices in the room be heard.
Yeah, exactly. Next question is from Ronaldo. And this is, I'm going to direct this to you, Michael. What tools have you reviewed or used to assess team effectiveness and performance?
A variety of tools, from maturity assessments for specific skills, up to tools that look at the softer side of the team. And you know, the tools that you select and the methods you select for doing team assessment, again, need to be purpose fit to the project and the environment you're in. In doing team building and assessing your teams, like any part of the project, there's always less time than you need to do the job 100%. So it's getting that 80% of the team assessment nailed. That's important. A lot of the tools are human factor tools that come out of academia, and again, it depends on what it is you're trying to assess and where you're going.
Great, thanks. Next question for you, Feroz, is from Jacques. And he asks, would you insert contract administration somewhere at the beginning in constructability?
I would say absolutely at the pre-feasibility level, you need to do a initial contract formation strategy because you need to first develop what is going to be your contracting strategy. Then you need to develop your contract formation strategy. Then you need to develop what is called the bid conditioning and contractor conditioning strategy. And then you need to develop, depending on the package and package dictionary concepts, you need to develop what is called the contract administration strategy. In other words, people immediately go down to say, how am I going to administer the project and administer it? But they haven't really done what is called the contract formation strategy. In fact, the contractor is totally unaware of half the thing the owner is expecting to administer as part of the contract execution strategy. So make sure your contract objective is set, your contract formation is there, your mechanism to do contract admin and change management is there, and then you would be able to do contract administration. Because many a times we sort of go and tell the owner, why are you doing this? And they go back to the contract, and the contract say, oh, it is not specified in my contract that I have to do this. And therefore, it is very hard to administer a contract and get information from the contractor if you have not specified this to be a requirement. Anyway, it can always be done as a change order, but that's not the right way to do it.
Great, thanks. Next question directed to you, Michael, from Vajera. Every project is basically a new organizational entity. Should the organizational change management should be embedded in the project planning process?
And it is. Feroz talked about a concept called OBS, your organizational breakdown structure. And, you know, organizations not only change from project to project, they change from phase to phase. Those people that start on feasibility are not necessarily the same people that are in scope definition and may not be the people that are in engineering or construction. So your organization in a project, also as between a project, changes on an ongoing basis. Having said that, the experience that's out there is you're doing the same type of project over and over again, you get a good sense of the start and the growth and the maturity of an organization as you go through the various phases, and then eventually as you come to the end of mechanical completion and wind down, you get a good sense of how you wind down the projects.
Great, thank you. We're almost out of time, and I've got going to do one more short question, and then we're going to do a brief wrap up. Just on the screen while we're doing that Q&A, just is the agenda for next week's session. Just keep that in mind. Everybody is automatically registered for that, and you will get a reminder, and we look forward to seeing you there. And with that, Feroz, I'm going to point this last question to you. And see here writes, the problem with projects is trying to engage the owner and get buy-in. Mature and large tiered companies have this process as part of their standard approval process. Mid to small tier companies have difficulty with this purely because they do not have internal resources. With the restricted availability of finance, especially mining companies are working on optimizing their operations and not large CapEx projects. The challenge is, how do you implement this process with them?
Oh, that's a very, it's not an easy answer. And in fact, if you go down even further, there is below the mid-tier level company, there is what they call the startup and juniors. And the startup and juniors are just to do the exploration or initial project, and all their objective is to really define the project in such a way. They're not interested in developing the project. They're trying to bring it up to a level and sell it. I think it's a challenge within the industry. We face it all the time. The mid-level companies always, in fact, we are dealing with a couple of mid-level companies, and they're saying, I don't need to spend that much amount of money in the front-end planning process. Why do I have to spend this amount of money? I can only get it done by 2 or 3 people. And I'm saying it's all about the area under the curve. If you don't do it now, you will do it later, but on a bigger area under the curve. So you might as well, and you know, most of the time that concept does not filter through, because the dollar in hand today is realized as a savings. Little do they know that they're going to end up spending $20, $25 and much more down the road. So I would say that, look, if you are a contractor and the mid-level companies and some of the owners are not fully educated as to what is required in the project, do spend the time, talk to them about the front-end planning process, talk to them about how you can improve the guarantee of success, give them certainty, give them reliability. In the end, you know, you can bring them to the table, but you can't eat the food for them. So you got to do your best to keep on doing it. It's a challenge within the industry. And we need to mature as an industry. And like Mike said, 98% of the projects, small, medium, and large, are not completing in a project. It's because people don't understand what it takes to do a project. They know how to run the business, but they don't know how to do the project. And sometimes that disconnect is where we are facing all the time, either at the owner level, contractor level, at the larger stakeholder level. Hopefully, with that, I can show you your favorite slide, Jeremy, with your permission. Like I said, we cannot predict the product outcome or the project outcome. We cannot direct the winds, but we can always adjust the sail and do the front-end planning and things which are in our control well, so you maximize the chance of your project. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Michael. Thank you very much, Feroz, and thank you very much to everybody who attended today. We look forward to seeing everybody next Tuesday. And with that, have a good afternoon.